October 12th, 2022. Well, I want to kind of do something a little more in depth on the Ukraine situation. I've been kind of covering this all along as part of other videos, but here I want to kind of just focus on this current situation and new developments. First of all, of course, we know that the Kerch Bridge that connected Russia to Crimea was attacked apparently by Ukraine with a truck bomb. Although I guess one could argue it was a Russian false flag thing, just like the pipeline has been claimed to be. But I tend to think it really was Ukraine that did it, and maybe with some help with some other forces. And it's interesting that apparently the attack appears to be due to a truck bomb primarily, although it's still a mystery to me what set the train on fire that's on the parallel train track. Possibility it was a common, and also how was the bomb detonated? Was this a suicide attack? I tend to think probably not. The other theory that's out there that it was a hapless individual that thought he was hauling some other kind of cargo and didn't realize it was a truck bomb, and maybe it was detonated by perhaps a drone that was flying overhead. Maybe that drone also fired a missile at the train. And that would be one explanation of what actually happened. Maybe that was and that the drone also sent the signal or the information of when to detonate the truck. At any rate, it knocked out one of the two passenger lines in there. The other one apparently is still intact, and I'm not sure of the exact status of the train track, which is really the most strategic thing. But at any rate, this led to a Russian reprisal involving a launching of many cruise missiles at targets throughout Ukraine, including the capital and many other cities. Of course, the Ukrainian government is claiming they shot down a large portion of these missiles, which I'm not sure how credible that really is, but I would say that some of the things that got hit, I'm thinking, are more likely to be collateral damage, basically from the interception of cruise missiles rather than deliberate targeting. I mean, does anybody seriously think that they would send a $2 million cruise missile to hit a playground? Doesn't make sense. More than likely, it either failed, malfunctioned, or was maybe shot down and the warhead hit the ground and detonated anyhow. And depending on the fusing, it's even conceivable that anti-aircraft missiles that failed to intercept might have detonated when they hit the ground. I guess I don't know what kind of safeguards on that are in these particular anti-aircraft missiles. But you get the idea that this was a major Russian strike that kind of changed the dynamics. And if it was an effective strike, then it may very well have damaged a lot of infrastructure like power plants, substations, and water works. Really putting some major pressure on the population. So that's, at any rate, that's kind of the status of that. I want to, okay. But if you like these videos, give me a like. It helps with the algorithm, and you can subscribe if you haven't already. I'm going to try to kind of then get on into this subject a little bit from the point of view of, what we might expect coming up next, because the problem we have right now is that it's clear that our own media is putting out a lot of propaganda, probably generated by our security agencies and the Pentagon. And it's obviously clear, I'm sure the Russians are getting really just totally hardcore propaganda over there. So, and I don't think Ukrainian statements are really that credible either. I tend to think they exaggerate a lot. In fact, one of the best source information on this is a video channel called History Legends, which I think has done some of the most best objective coverage I've seen anywhere. And based on what we see is that, yes, Ukraine has the initiative. They're on the offensive. Although, like I say, to some degree, I think that maybe the degree to which that's the case may have been overstated a little bit. They definitely have gained ground, but to some degree, perhaps Russia is basically trading ground for saving units. Like there was some claim by the Ukrainians that the unit around Kharkiv was surrounded. They were going to lose 5,000 troops. In reality, no, most of them got out. Yes, a few people got shot, and there's a few bodies they showed us. But more or less, the bulk of the unit withdrew back into Russia, basically. Or in some areas, they also moved to the south to a different line of defense. So that's kind of the situation we're looking at now. Another development, though, that's kind of brewing here is that there has been, yesterday I saw an article that shows that a large amount of Russian troops are flowing into Belarus. And the question is, what's going on with that? I mean, is that a jumping off point for another axis into Ukraine? Is it simply there to secure Belarus potentially against a revolution inside of Belarus? Or is it something else? Well, we don't know yet, but that is a factor that isn't being discussed a lot, but it's out there. So you have that. Another figure that's in this whole thing, because there are some sources that are really kind of, naysayers to the mainstream thing. One of them is this Colonel McGregor, who's really taking a completely different point of view. Again, some of the things he says leaves me somewhat suspicious. He sounds just a little too rah-rah for Russia, and he's been proven wrong repeatedly on some of his claims, on some ways. On the other hand, he maintains that, and there is some logic to this, that Russia actually, believing their false intelligence that the Ukrainians wouldn't put up a strong fight, went in there fairly light to begin with and didn't really go after major infrastructure in Ukraine and was hoping to basically take it intact. And since then, they've kind of still been playing around with the idea of trying to weaken Ukrainian morale and so forth, while taking over areas that they want to keep, to annex. But that basically at this point, they've reached a level at which they're convinced they're not going to succeed at that negotiations aren't likely to be successful. And so they're moving into a new mode, which is somewhat triggered by that event on the bridge. And now they're going after infrastructure, and they're really out to wreak havoc in Ukraine as much as possible. And he holds the viewpoint that the bulk of Russian army has been withdrawn sometime after the original offensive failed, and been withdrawn back into Russia for regrouping, and I guess to be, new conscripts have been trained and will flesh out these forces. Meanwhile, the main fighting has been done by various other groups, such as the Wagner group, which is kind of a mercenary group that the Russians recruited. Various volunteer units they've raised, the separatist troops from Donbass, and certain elements still of the Russian army to kind of back them up. But basically what we're seeing in combat recently is, for the most part, not a large amount of their best. I mean, there are areas like an elite paratroop unit that's kind of fighting a rearguard action down in the Kherson region, for instance. But essentially, that there's a lot of Russian capability left to be committed. And now this is kind of controversial because the mainstream media over here is saying, no, there isn't, that they're kind of on their last legs, that they're really down to the point of either capitulating or thinking about nukes or something like that. But perhaps this is not really the case. Perhaps, come winter, after the muddy season's over with and the freeze comes in, and after all these forces have been positioned, that Russia will launch a much larger winter offensive, and that will potentially be more devastating than what they did last year. And perhaps with all the combat experience that they've achieved recently, they'll be a lot more effective. That they went in there with a lot of false assumptions, not understanding all the weapons we provided to Ukraine and so forth. And it's taken them some time to react to that situation. And now maybe they'll come back stronger. Or perhaps Colonel McGregor is completely off base again. It's really hard to tell, but I find it hard to believe because just kind of numbers I'm aware of, as I mentioned before, you're talking nearly up to 250,000 conscripts, that most of which have not been committed to action. And with the new Russian annexation laws, totally rejected in the West, of course, is illegal. But inside of Russia, that gives a legal authorization to the government to use all these forces that they have available. And we'll just have to see how that turns out. I mean, I just thought that'd be an interesting point to consider, and that's what we're kind of waiting for, I think, as we go into the winter to see, how this war evolves. Um, you know, I mean, I guess based on what we know, it could go either way, and there could be escalatory possibilities. At any rate, I just thought I'd kind of present that idea and kind of look at where we are right now, because and I tend to think that this would be a good time to consider opening negotiations with Russia to see if they want out of this thing. I mean, obviously, we'd have to give them something for them to agree to it, I think, at this point, because I don't think they're completely defeated yet. But if they could get a fair settlement, Elon Musk, as I mentioned previously in a video, has presented a theory of basically conducting votes based on international auspices, not Russian, obviously, but the UN, for instance, could send in, if we could reach this ceasefire. Maybe peacekeepers could be sent in to separate the two sides, and maybe in that environment you could have elections. And probably Crimea would vote to stay with Russia, I think. The other areas are really hard to say. Probably Donbass, I don't know. The problem with all this idea, though, of course, as I mentioned before, is the displacement of people is who gets to vote on this, because a lot of the people that originally were residents there are no longer there. They either went west into Ukraine or out of the country, or they went east into Russia. So, at any rate, that's an idea. Otherwise, this thing will probably just drag on. Anyway, I'll close this for now. I do post these on Rumble, and of course, you can follow me on my various social media accounts, the addresses of which are below. And we'll wrap this up for now. Until next time.